record. Over to you, Peter.
So I'm wondering what I can tell you. I'm mainly to update you in the sense that it's a book club, so you've read the book.
Yes.
Or that's me understanding, or at least some of it, or flick through it. Thank you for that. So I wrote Flatpack 1 after 4 years of being a town councillor in Frome. So Frome's one of the biggest town councils in the country. So there's a chunk of big town councils. So it was politicised, or put another way, people were previously, before the independents took over, people were elected by their political party rather than anything else. And then, as you'll know, a bunch of us came together who weren't friends before, and but simply felt that one of the things that was stopping Frome from having a more ambitious, well-functioning local council was party politics, and therefore, if we could rid the town of party politics, that would be a good thing to do, and form a group of individuals working together is how I kind of see it, which is, to me, is slightly different from independence, but we can talk about that. And so that group has served Frome well. I mean, it's meant that Frome has been fantastically ambitious and done a lot of things that town councils normally can't. One of the things that you'll know from the book is that I said that the model's not really transferable higher up. And since I can't remember when I wrote it now, but sort of a couple of years ago, I wrote Flatpack 2, the aim of which was to follow up on towns who'd kind of taken the ideas of what we'd done and then evolved them. Because although slightly stupidly, in a sense, the problem with the title, like, the subtitle of Flatpack 1 is a DIY, it's like, buy this book and it'll and then do IKEA.
Yes.
It was never really meant to be that, actually. It was more, here's a set of ideas, take what you can, evolve them how you want, and see what happens. And many towns have done that. So Flatpack 2 follows up on some of those towns, sees what they've changed, sees whether some of the things that I said were essential really are essential. And then one of the things which it also does is sort of says, so was I right that you can't take this higher? And we can talk about this because you're all councillors at, Dave and Holly are councillors at a higher level than a town level. And I'd always said that you can't really do this higher, but actually there are now a number of people at both district and county level who have stood with a very similar model, and it's worked, or they are in power, and in some cases, well, 3 cases they're in cabinets running things. But again, we can look at that. And then what I've just done, or been persuaded to do with a bunch of others, is to launch a support group to help people who want to stand in this way. Hi, Graham and Mrs. Graham, maybe Mrs. Graham.
Linda.
Hi, Linda. So we, a couple of weeks ago, launched Flatpack 2021 because all of the 2020 elections were abandoned until 2021. Whether 2021 ones happen, God knows. But there was a feeling that there was enough knowledge around. There are enough people who've made this work to support others who want to do it. So we've set up a website and regular Zoom calls and a mentoring system, and are beginning to collect some really interesting people from and groups from all over the country who want to run in similar ways all over the country, and then surprising places like Wombat Mountain in Victoria, New South Wales, because wow. You get this weird thing when you write a book of people I get sort of a Facebook picture saying, thanks, I've just taken over Wombat Mountain, bought your book. And you think, bloody hell, how did that happen? Anyway, so Flatpack sold far more copies. I mean, I was persuaded to write it by the publisher because he said, this is a good story, will you write it? And I thought, yeah, I've written things before. This shouldn't take too long. Sort of 6 months later, I'm cursing ever having said I'll have anything to do with it. But actually, 5,000 copies later or something, there is a zeitgeist about wanting to do politics differently, politics with a small p, that people have taken up, and it's taken me into all sorts of fascinating and interesting conversations like this one. Which, how would I ever be here? Anyway,
yes, we wouldn't have picked you out of the crowd at random, would we?
No. So I mean, that's perhaps, that's where I am now, involved in running this campaign. 2 books. There won't be a third one, as far as I can see. Not by me. I think I've done that. Yeah, and of course it'll be interesting to know. I mean, it's up to you how you run this, and I don't know how you do in terms of things you want to clarify or things before we discuss. Or I mean, I'm happy to talk about anything you want.
Well, just a note to Linda and Graham. So we did a quick round of introductions. We more or less all know each other here, apart from Peter, but it might just be worth, for Peter's sake, as we're a small group, just a quick intro from yourselves, if you'd be happy to do so. We are, of course, recording, but we can cut it out if you like.
What can we say? We are Liberal Democrat activists living in East Yorkshire.
Are you councillors? Or
I am.
Cheers.
Did you see that? You got that in stereo.
That was in sync, wasn't it? Well, yeah. So I think the first question, we normally take questions in a sort of hands up basis, either in the chat box or just small enough just to really put your hand up. I'll be remiss of people who said they can't make it, but I've said, why not just stand as Lib Dems? And I think we joked before Linda and Graham, you joined us. David's way. Well, why not stand as a Green in that case? We disagree. There are structural flaws with the system. We disagree that underrepresentation. And it's a view which consults. There was a line here about consulting, constantly and creatively, as such. And I was reading through the principles, and I thought many Lib Dems, I imagine many Conservatives, many Labour councillors, MPs would say, I aim to abide by those principles. So what do you say when you meet party councillors?
Well, I suppose I am meeting party councillors,
yes,
aren't I?
Yes, you are.
I think one of the things is that this model, at the beginning, for us in Frome, getting rid of the party politicians was really important, because they'd fallen into traditional Westminster style confrontation.
Okay.
So essentially they always oppose each other, because that's what you're kind of meant to do. And they also took party line from above. So in a sense, what they weren't doing in a relatively small town, so 35,000 people, was they weren't doing that consulting and listening. They were taking the ideology from above and then operating with that and then opposing each other. And so as a direct result of that, they've been Lib Dems and Tories for many years, alternating, not every election, but most elections. So they didn't actually do anything. They were massively unambitious, in the sense that when we took over, it's like normally when you take over, you kind of find the coffers bare. We found the opposite. The reserves were massive because they never spent them, because they were so busy arguing about what they should do. Now, I know that that's not necessarily what's going to be happening, but my particular experience of that was, that party politics was a real problem for us in Frome. And so at the beginning, and when I wrote that book, I was very anti-party politics and party politicians, I suppose, in many ways. And I've certainly softened in that line, but not least because there are many people who have joined groups of independents working together at this level, who have a history of working in party politics, or are members of party, of political parties, and that's been absolutely fine. And indeed, in all of the 3 Independents for Frome groups, they've been members of political parties.
Yep.
The key thing is that they're operating on what they hear in Frome and see in Frome, rather than what they're being told from Westminster. See what I mean? So yes. They're not
don't wear
having
the
to
party hat
decide.
locally.
Yeah. So I have nothing against, you know, I just think that people need to be able to listen and change their minds. And if you're constrained by a manifesto that's been defined by the party, and then you can't move out of that. You can't be nimble enough to move sideways because the party is anti-nuclear, but there might be some reason why you need to be pro-nuclear. I can't imagine what it is personally, but you know, whatever issue it might be, if you're constrained by that and it's a slow process, you've got to go through the whole system, you've got to go back to the annual, you know, conference to change anything. It's no good because our lives move so quickly now.
They do. And I asked our last speaker, am I getting this correct? Our last speaker was Ed Davey, who's now the leader of the Lib Dems. I asked him, how would he defend himself if you were both on the same chat? And he said, you elect a Liberal Democrat based on Liberal Democrat values. So you know, you have some idea of who you'll be electing ahead of time. So they stand for something in the ballot box. And the same for all the other parties. And I did a bit of, I want to see are there any current independent MPs? And there are 4, but independents the same way as, you know, expelled from previous parties, and all 4 had been expelled for, you know, and so Ed Davey gave the argument that you vote someone in on a party ticket. This is probably not as we expected. You know, you vote them in a party ticket to be this sort of standard of morality or standard of certain values, and the 4 independents have all been kicked out of their parties. One for harassing a woman, one for, you know, aggressive behavior shown to someone else. I can't remember the other 2, but you know, suddenly and they obviously they're not representing what independents are like, you know, can't tar. But do you think there is I think that was his side of the coin, you know, there is value to a party ticket. So I'm happy to open up to everyone else, but whilst I do that, unless there are any other questions, how is the current project going of getting council independents elected nationwide? But I open. Oh no, sorry, lower hand. Sorry, Dave. Sorry, you are digitally raising your hand. Yes, sorry, I was expecting an actual hand to go up. So please speak. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I mean, the first thing I'd like to say is to Peter is thank you for writing the book, obviously, and thank you for joining us today. We've spoken in one of these previous groups about books that I wish everybody in my local party had read, and this is probably one to add to that list. Certainly because it's an inspiring story, but also because I think there's lots in there that correctly identifies many of the downfalls of the current political system at local government level. The one thing that I just wanted to chip in on was in terms of people voting for a candidate because of the policies of the party they represent, I would question that at a local level. I think that's true, or truer probably for general elections, but certainly my experience as a local candidate, I've stood as a Green 2 or 3 times before I got elected, and I stood, you know, I got elected last year and the year before that, and the year before that again, in that same ward, the share of the vote was considerably smaller, and it grew year on year to the point where I won last year. Now the policies weren't any different during that time. The policies of my party weren't different. What was different was people had started to see voting for me as a viable option that might actually get them somewhere. And obviously in a first past the post system, if you've just got somebody coming in as an outsider in a town like mine, which is very, very tribally Labour, a lot of people would say to me on the doorstep, well, I would vote for you, but I just don't think you've got a chance of winning. So what's the point? So part of it was just getting around that. And as I say, the policies didn't change in that time, but what changed was people's opinions of me as a viable alternative. And I know you mentioned in the book about candidates sort of not having a lot to say necessarily on the doorstep, but they're kind of sitting behind a national party's manifesto. but I would, my personal experience is that policies of the National Party rarely, if ever, came up in my conversations with residents. For me, and I know my experience might be very different to others, for me, it was much more, I deliberately actually steered away from that, because I know that a National Party policy isn't something that that anyone in my community can change, but there are plenty of very hyper local issues that we can take action on and try and improve for people. So I think you're right that at general elections, people vote on a National Party manifesto basis some of the time, not necessarily all, but I think with local politics, it doesn't have to be like that. I'm not saying it never is, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Mm. No, I'd absolutely agree that it doesn't have to be, but it all too often is. So, I mean, certainly with us, people, you just got vote Carol Bullen Conservative. And if you looked on the website, you could find anything, what you got was a link to the National Tory Party. And well, and that was the same for all of them. There was no, you might have got a strap line, I mean, or, you know, a couple of lines, you know, Dave has lived in Hull for the last 24 years and his children went to school here or something. But that's kind of like that was it. There's no more. But what you're describing is much more local, isn't it? And you, as you say, selling yourself, or not selling is the wrong word, but I mean, putting across what you could do. And I would have thought as a Green, that's more what you have to do, isn't it? Because the Greens are never going to be in power. So therefore, the only way that you can really change things is by having influence in the way that you're describing.
Mm.
But you see, I think that's where things cross over a bit, and it's really, and I have nothing against that at all. I think that's what you have to do, isn't it? And but it's a relative rarity in that most people put themselves across as their party. You just see Mark Lib Dem, and then a little bit maybe, and as Mark says, you'd see the ethos of the, or what Ed Davies said, you'd see the sort of the ideology of the Lib Dem party, which might work for some things and not for others, and what if that's, how does that pick up on local issues, which you can do and have done, obviously, and that's worked for you, which is great.
Yeah, the only other thing that I would say, and I'll shut up after this because I don't want to dominate the thing, but one thing that I'm conscious of here in South Tyneside is that there is a history of people standing as independents and then shortly thereafter becoming something else, which actually they really were all along. Exactly. And that's a problem that I'm not sure what the answer is to.
No. I kind of wish we'd called ourselves individuals or something, or found another word, because it's confusing. Of course, UKIP, I don't know if UKIP still exists, but UKIP further confused that because, of course, they're the UK independent party. And Mark's right that the only independents, or the only independents since Martin Bell have been people chucked out of their party because of some major misdemeanor. Yeah. And usually that is the case. And that was our finding at the beginning, that independents were too extreme for whatever they were in. You know, they were too right-wing for the Tories, or had been variously thrown out, which is why we felt we had to have an ethos and say this is how we're going to behave, and a way of working. But retrospectively, we would have been better at, I don't know what the word might be, but if we'd been individuals rather than independents, because that word is a bit sullied. In fact, I've just written that down because maybe we need to work on that. Sorry, I was just wondering whether Holly and Linda had found on the doorstep the same thing, whether you found, I mean, were questions, or is your, you know, I don't know if you do doorsteppy things, but if you do they tend to be party questions, or what are you as individuals? I mean, have you had the same experience as David? Because obviously the Greens are, I didn't mean to be quite so cruel, but you know, judging by the history of South Tyneside, the Greens aren't going to suddenly bounce up and take over. So there's a more obvious reason to work with you as an individual, whereas the Lib Dems are in power in many local councils.
I think so. Actually, I think Lib Dem in Hull to a lot of people simply means not Labour, because the a lot of my voters are more natural Tories, really. So for us, actually keeping party policy separate is actually quite important, especially like Hull voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. So being the anti-Brexit party, I was quite, but the thing is, people on the doorstep don't really associate us with so no, I don't think party policy usually does come into it for me. However, I like, in a way, being a Lib Dem for me kind of allows me to sort of remind myself of why I'm doing it and what my priorities are. And then when, say, I've got the Labour candidate in the area slagging off the local children's home, I can sort of remember, well, I'm a Liberal and I have empathy, and I, you know, if I would just, I feel like sometimes having that allegiance for me is quite important, because I think if it were just me, I'd be concerned that maybe I'd just try and take that sort of popular line that, yeah, we just need to get rid of it because it's a pain, whilst, you know, actually stepping back and thinking, I'm a Liberal, you know, I think about these things. Actually, for me, kind of gives me that kind of sort of power to actually stand by my principles, if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I'll contribute as well. I think in the East Riding, which is where I'm a councillor, there's 67 seats, and at the moment 46 of them are Tories. So there are 9 of us, Lib Dems, 2 Yorkshire Party, 7 independents that have formed themselves into a group, which I found extremely strange when I was elected. I didn't understand this concept of an independent group. There's one independent who will not join with the group, so he's an independent, and there's one Conservative who's been thrown out for basically disrespecting a chap with a German name, so he trades as an independent Conservative. It's all very confusing, but basically it does mean that in this council, which is very much officer-led, we, as the second biggest party, are the conscience of the people, basically, and I suppose what we trade on is not only our constitution, that we are all about equality, etc., but the fact that we are the people who can hold the Tories to account, because nobody else can. And so on the doorstep, it's very much a case of they get their own way. If you vote for us, at least we can fight for you, which the others cannot do. So I do find this concept, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of the independents they've actually been thrown out of previous parties. So although one of them is actually a Liberal Democrat who kind of infiltrates the independent group to give us a bit of feedback. But of the independent group, the majority of them will just vote naturally with the Tories because that's where their home is. So they aren't really independent. The only independent is this one independent guy. So I love your idea, but you know, somebody's got to be able to hold the officers to account. And with the East Riding Constitution, the portfolio holder's description isn't even to hold the officers to account. And as the officers are all natural, or mainly natural Tories anyway, it's very difficult to get that political balance. Would that be solved if there were more independents? Not on the East Riding of Yorkshire Council, it wouldn't. However, I also sit on Beverley Town Council. Now, on Beverley Town Council, there isn't a single Conservative. There's, at the moment, 7 Lib Dems. There's 3 Labour, 1 independent Labour who's left the Labour Party because she doesn't like the way it's being run at the moment. There are 2 independents, one of whom votes with us, one of whom votes with Labour. I mean, it doesn't really give the independents a voice, and I think that's one of my concerns about people standing for independence. So I'm not sure I'm quite convinced with your argument. At least if you are a Green or a Liberal Democrat, you've got a broad idea of what we actually stand for.
Can I maybe ask that? I was just flicking through my copy here, and you wrote, You know, as a member of party, you do not have the blanket of a party machine with preset rules and expectations. Next to which, I don't know if you can see it, I wrote the word "ha" with an exclamation mark. You know, I thought party expectations and rules making your life easier isn't quite always the way. But you highlighted the difference. You know, you talk about a way of working, and a way of working comes with a group. So that's the difference between an independent and a group of individuals. And I wondered if you might be able to tell us a bit more. You know, for example, Hull's most famous MP was an independent, William Wilberforce. You know, and you know, is revered for what he achieved in abolishment, but he did not have a way of working with other independent. You know, he was a pain in the backside of the cabinet of the day. But you know, what separates the independents of East Riding who do not work together to get elected, but work together and, you know, have found each other in the council chamber? What separates an individual independence and the group?
Yeah.
I think it's the way of working, as I understand it.
Yeah, you're right. It is that way of working. So it is, I mean, what we were offering on the doorstep was to say, this is how we will work as a group of individuals. This is how we will behave together, which is very much based on the ideas of sort of municipalism, of a lot of feminization of politics. So a lot of that is around listening and being prepared to change your mind, or, you know, being very open to changing your mind. Which Dave's nodding because it's very much part of the Green Party's ethos as well. That there's a constant process of that. I'm not so sure it is of others because I haven't read them, or of the Lib Dems. But being able to really, you know, work within a group to really listen to what's being said, even when that's coming from somewhere completely different. Because I think we get so used, particularly within politics, but also perhaps in ordinary discussions, to trying to jump in with your own view before you've really listened to what the other one is. So we spent quite a lot of time, you know, in facilitated workshops in kind of how in listening, and a lot of time getting to know each other as individuals. So to build up respect and trust for each other, so that you could actually hear people. You know, I have so many stories of a guy called Nick White, who's, you know, so Tory that, well, so far right that he was courted by UKIP, who was one of the first two groups. I mean, he was courted by UKIP to stand as an MP, and, you know, and he and I have become, you know, good friends in many ways because we were able to genuinely listen to each other's point of view, and then disagree with them, and then, if necessary, have a vote, and then move on. See what I mean? So what we found is that having that ways of working, having a this is how we will work together, was essential. And I would say that the groups who have done most, so Buckfastleigh, Portishead, there's another one who's Hadley Community. It's near Durham. You know, others that have really functioned well in this model have had some sort of agreement about how they will behave together. And most of that is about being non-conflictual. Doesn't mean absolutely disagree, but don't then particularly hold grudges, because that seems to me to be at the root of much of the problem. That, you know, you vote, you have an idea, or you know, you propose a motion, I vote against it, and you make bloody sure that you vote against me next time, even if mine was actually a good idea. You know, that sort of stuff, which happens so much, doesn't it? And it's like, from the outside, I think people see that and they go, what? You know, why did Mark just vote against that? Because they don't, it's like, doesn't everybody want the bus stop? And you voted against it because it's a revenge for when I voted against your fish pond. I mean, it's kind of like all of that, those games that are within politics, that's what we tried to get rid of. And where groups have been able to really get stuff done, it seems that is where they've been able to meet as people. In many ways, I see it as like behaving like a well-functioning family, where there's constant disagreement and maybe all sorts of bickering and whatnot, but you move on and live together.
You're on mute, by the way, Matt.
That's why I wasn't handing over to you, David. I like that. I like that bickering family analogy. I'm scribbling away here. Over to you,
Yeah.
Dave.
Thank you. Yeah, I was interested to get onto the idea of the ways of working thing and the idea of how your group has historically operated. And this is an ongoing discussion I've had with several people who are Labour Party councillors or members in my local area who fail to comprehend that anyone has a problem with group discipline as a concept. And obviously it raises very serious questions about predetermination as well with decision making. And if you've got a large group of people that are going into a debate with an agreement that they're going to disregard any evidence or arguments that are presented and are just going to vote in a previously agreed way, I personally can't see how that possibly can be a good idea in terms of serving the interests of the people who you're there to represent. But as I say, people from other parties would disagree with me. But I personally found your ways of working, that the summary in the book, really, really interesting. And I know that I'd be curious kind of to hear from my Lib Dem colleagues here how their groups work on a council. Obviously, at the moment, I'm a sole Green councillor here. I'm hoping optimistically that if elections go ahead as planned, that might not be the case this time next year. And if there is more than one of us here, we will have to agree how we are going to work as a group. And in our party, that will be up to us to decide. It's not the case that there's a set of kind of a green group set of rules or guidelines imposed from above. That'll be up to us to do. And I would suggest that we draw quite heavily on your template there actually for that. But just in terms of the grudges thing, I mean, that's a whole new world of tribalism really that just seems, well, it's obviously very petty, but it seems to me like it's quite transparently petty as well. And no wonder when people behave like that normal, quote unquote, residents are so switched off from politics at the local level. Sorry, I know that's not a question.
Sorry, which the vast majority of people are. I mean, there's even with a big Labour increase in membership, which I don't know if that still has been retained, but it's still only between 2 and 3% of the potential voters are members of political parties, which is extraordinarily little, and that's pretty much true across Europe. Mm-hmm. So we've kind of given away our decision making to this tiny group in a way that seems very odd to me.
Just one other thing which I forgot to mention. You talked about people opposing simply for the sake of it. You come up with an idea and my job is to think the opposite. And obviously when people actually think like that, they're allowing their position by default to be dictated by the other person. The other side's choosing what your policy is simply by adopting the reverse of what they come to. So it's like, it's like people that think they're being rebellious because they're doing the opposite from everyone else. Well, you're actually allowing your position to be dictated by those that are doing the other thing by default.
Yeah,
I'll jump on that note afterwards. I'll go to Graham next.
There we go. Yeah, I just wanted to make a few points. I was thinking, imagine 2 days before a general election, and on the television they say, and the independents have got 70% of the votes. It's looking like an independent landslide. One of the big problems you'd have is you think, well, which direction is the country going to go in? Because you could see a whole bunch of people in Parliament. If it was, say, the Tories ahead, or Labour ahead, or you never know. You can dream the Lib Dems ahead, or the Greens. At least you'd know. You say, okay, I know where the country's going. But imagine if the 2 days before the election, Andrew Marr's saying, it looks like an independent landslide, but you think, where is the country going to go? Because you don't know who the hell you're really voting for on a sort of national level. One of the advantages of the party system is at least you know what somebody stands for. So Lib Dem, I think we've discussed this already, but it's worth saying again. Lib Dems as a certain frame of mind, Tory, UKIP, Labour, Socialist Workers' Party, they all represent a certain frame of mind, which people are voting for. And another point I would make is that of all the parties, I think the Lib Dems are probably one of the parties least susceptible to the party line. I mean, you look at about my age. Can you remember during the day in the 80s, in the days of the SDP Liberal Alliance? Do you remember when they tried to get liberal activists to agree with nuclear weapons? Because that was SDP policy. No, they just wouldn't do it. But I mean, we've got a couple of Lib Dem councillors in the East Riding who were both Brexiteers. You know, so I think the party discipline thing doesn't always work out. And the other thing that worries me as well is, you know, when Donald Trump started his campaign to be president, I mean, he came from outside the Republican establishment. He was really kind of an independent who just bullied his way into it. So you could end up electing a whole bunch of Donald Trumps, people who were just opportunists and were just kind of bullying their way into the system.
Yeah.
This is what worries me about independence. You wouldn't really know who you were electing. You know, I mean, you could even let in people like racists, for example. You know, because all the parties in the UK now are all against racism. You know,
we're vetted.
Yeah, but you could end up letting people in who've got really horrible views, and they're running as independents simply because no other party can accommodate them. Maybe that's how Donald Trump started out. You know, because a lot of Republicans are distancing themselves from him, aren't they, and saying they can't back him. Anyway, just a few random thoughts.
Yeah. Can I just comment on some of those?
Yeah.
No, absolutely. So that's why those are all reasons why I don't think this works at a higher level.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, absolutely, I completely agree with you. It's what essentially we were doing was saying that at a town or a district level, or you know, you can say, this is who I am, this is how I will work within this group of individuals, and absolutely central to that is also much more genuine participatory democracy. So you're saying we will put in place participatory budgeting, you know, where the people are involved. We will be going out having, I mean, we ran things which were effectively citizens' assemblies, where we were, you know, getting a large number of people from the town to help make strategic decisions. You know, because it's like, what do I know about this? You need, it's kind of, I mean, I know that you're quite right. I think it was Mark said at the beginning that all the parties, or it might have been Dave said, all the parties say they'll do this, but actually genuinely doing it. So I mean, so really upping the level of ways in which people engage, which is so easy to do now, partly because of, you know, internet stuff, where you can have an issue that you're going to make a decision on, put it out there onto Facebook or whatever, and have voting, you know. But in some cases, you can say, we will go with what the people say. So it's a different model in that way. And I absolutely agree that, and I'm sure that's part of what Donald Trump, you know, nobody knew what the hell he believed in.
Yeah.
Or they kind of did. But if they'd really understood, I don't know. I mean, I've no idea whether they would have believed with him. And one of the weird, you know, the extraordinary things, and it absolutely, it's the final nail in the coffin of party politics for me, is the way that the Republicans have stuck with him. I mean, you're right, there's a few leaving now because they're kind of going, they're rats leaving a sinking ship. But I mean, for 4 years or whatever it is, they've stuck with this nutter. I mean, except for the one guy who died, whose name I've forgotten, McCain, you know, who's constantly was outspoken, wasn't he? But what's that about? That's extraordinary, isn't it? To have this bloke who's more and more maverick and stick with him because he's your party. Whoa. You know, I'd like to think that within British politics, well, I don't know, actually, now we're seeing it, aren't we? Because, you know, some of what Boris is doing, I can't believe that the MPs, you know, the ordinary, rather boring country Tories, do they really believe in some of the stuff that he's putting forward? And if not, why don't they bloody say so?
Well, on Brexit, they say it's what the British people voted for. So it's like on 1st of January, we're all going to go outside and shoot ourselves in the foot.
I know. So I actually, you know, I really agree with you. And I think that's why what I'm proposing can only be, you know, doesn't work at the higher levels, really. But I think that it would be enormously helped by the political parties encouraging genuine independence at the lower levels, so that so that parties don't interfere. And the Greens, so I don't know about the Lib Dems. Labour can't do that, if you see what I mean. So that Labour had to stand, or were told, the main guy in Frome said, we've been told that we have to stand against you, even if we know who you are and we believe in what you're doing. It's, the party policy is we must stand against you. So we are. The Greens didn't stand in Frome last time because actually what we as a group of independents have been doing fulfilled so much of the Green manifesto that it was kind of like, why would we stand against you and risk splitting a vote and getting the Tories in who wouldn't do it? So it made, so it was a sensible, pragmatic decision. I don't know if the Lib Dems, it sounds like you've got a bit more flexibility if you can have, open Brexiteers within the Lib Dems, which, whatever I think about Brexit, I think is good that there's not such a savage party whip from above that.
Well, one third of Lib Dem party members voted for Brexit, so so you're going to have to deal with them somehow.
Yeah.
But there was a big influx and outflux. Once again to Linda or Graham. I can see a hand.
Sorry. No, I was just going to comment that the party whip is to vote for or abstain for our own proposal. So we don't have this mandated you must vote against system. And I know the Green Party has a free hand. They can vote whichever way they wish. So we're kind of almost there. I think what people do who certainly in East Riding, if they really don't want to register, and this is easier now we're on Zoom, is they just switch off. They just turn their video cameras off and mute themselves. So so their vote is not registered. So in fact, in some ways, there's more democracy now that we're actually working on Zoom than there was before.
Oh, interesting. So they just when the vote comes up, they effectively go blank.
Yes.
Yeah, they submerge.
Yes.
Like submarines.
Yeah, interesting.
Well, I might just say you've said a couple of times it doesn't work above town. Yeah, I work as a campaign manager, so what the starting point of any election campaign is how many votes do I need to win? You half the number of votes cast, you add one if you want a really quick sum, and you go, now how am I going to get to that number? So Adam Hawley, who you might know, came to me in Hull, and he said, look, you're the campaign manager and you're standing as a Lib Dem candidate, and he showed me this book. He said, I've got however many months left till the election to convince you to stand as an independent. And I've learned that so there are 24 Lib Dem councillors, and all but 2 of the other 57 are Labour. We have 2 Conservatives. And if something is proposed by the main opposition, the Labour group will oppose it. And I've even noticed if I put a leaflet out, on a certain issue in a certain part of town, it gets knocked back, which is amazing. Or I can frame the issue in different parts of town by saying litter is a big concern here, and you'll instantly get a leaflet going out the next week by the Labour campaign manager saying litter is certainly not an issue in this part of town, and delivering it, stepping over bin bags and all the rest and rubbish in the streets to deliver a letter. It's a bit like the 1984 line. You're told to reject the evidence of your eyes and ears, and just and it starts becoming absurd, really absurd sort of campaigns. Because you've stopped, because deadlock does lead to people not listening to to residents, and you start fighting the opposition, whether you are the opposition or you are in power. It's please, but I might also say, I don't know if I should be spurring you on, but I did a quick check of how many independents there are above sort of town council level, and in councils we have 33 councils have an independent group leader. Beyond that, 34 more councils are part of the administration, and there are 700 independents as a whole. So of 248 councils, about 1/5 to 1/6 of those have independents, being part of the main opposition or part of the administration. So that's pretty good going for such a you know, because what you've got is you've got a distributed network, and that's from the LGA. So why do you think, you know, why do you think it's not a mission you can push beyond I don't know.
I wonder who those people are to an extent, because some will be like the group who Linda was describing, probably. You see what I mean? So this is where we go back to my terminology of independents and individuals. I mean, they may be a maverick bunch of odds and sods who've been thrown out of their parties. I mean, that will be included in those figures.
Yeah, that will.
So they're not necessarily well, this is a view. Obviously, they're not necessarily a good thing. They're individuals, but they're not. I mean, I suppose it's who you're working for, isn't it? Or where are you really focused? And
Yeah.
if the focus is on that, is genuinely listening to the needs and aspirations and opportunities for the people with whom you live, great. If the focus is on getting power at a national level from below, for me, that doesn't work. I mean, or that's where a lot of the problem is, and a lot of what we see here is that, including amongst the Lib Dems, is that getting in at a local level is a step to being getting into the district level, is a step to getting into the county, and then yes, you can stand as the MP, or you can support the MP, and so it's all about getting power at the national level, whereas the objective has the target's changed. It's like, who's really listening to to what people actually want and trying to achieve it. And tragically, it may be the Greens who are never going to get in.
Can I just before I hand over to David on that one, is there a compromise between trying to get power to use it, and also, maybe mass consultation? Well, is there a compromise, between how power can be exercised and how morally it can be done? So, how much power you can centralize, because what David and what David and Peter have pushed for sort of in this hour is this sort of decentralizing of power. Power flows downward, sort of like water. But the centralizing tendency in Westminster politics, above all else, is to bring it in, to exercise it. So where do we find that balance, or where might we find that balance? If because we've currently found it lying with Westminster, but might we find it more, and with little pockets of true democracy, participatory budgets worldwide. If you read Humankind, which is a book we're considering for December, from Argentina to towns in the UK, you have true participatory budgets, which are really hard to exercise in other areas. So where might we find that balance between decentralized and centralized? What can we be realistically hopeful for? And then I'll hand over to David after you've.
Well, you see, for me, it's about that 98%. I mean, what I really hope is that we get more and more people's assemblies, citizens' assemblies, people actually coming together to say what they want, that are genuinely listened to at a local level, and that starts to become the norm, and that is then properly listened to by people above it. I mean, what we need, to me, is a huge sort of political re-education. That's with a small p, and that sounds a bit, Pol Pot, didn't it? But which wasn't what I meant. in political re-education. I mean, it's like for me, part of the tragedy of Brexit was that people have got so little experience of making decisions, and in that case, they were suddenly asked to make a yes/no decision, fed with, I mean, we know all this, don't we? Fed with a lot of lies. So it was such a complete and utter disaster coming. But we've kind of given away our power to our representatives, who can't really represent us because it's such a complex world. And then we sit back and wait for things to be happening. We moan about them, we elect them, and then immediately they're elected, we start slagging them off. It's like, hang on, we just elected this person. Surely we should be giving them we should be trying to help them to do that job. The system is completely dysfunctional at the moment. So for me, it's just finding ways to get much more mass engagement. And the Lib Dems and Labour, particularly, well, any party could do that. But I mean, my experience again here of the Lib Dems is that we always get a standard questionnaire through the door. What are the issues that concern you? Is it litter or vandalism or this or that? And to me, all they're about is trying to collect my name and address as, and at the bottom there's a will you put a poster in your window kind of thing. And that's what it's about. And to me, that undermines the whole process of genuine engagement, because people are wiser than that. They just think, what are you going to do with this? And I always ask later after the election, so can I see the results? I never, ever get any. I've never had a result. I don't think, and all the parties do it. It's just it's tokenism at its worst, and it undermines the whole process. I've rambled a bit there, but I mean, it's for me.
No, you've made. I will say, I'll very quickly counter before handing over to David. Is I have just put out, I think, just over 3,000 of those surveys where I'm standing to be a candidate. I have since received 300 bits of casework, which is how I'm spending the rest of my Sunday afternoon, which is very genuine bits of casework. But I will not say no to someone putting a poster in their window, and councillors also have to get their message across, and having 1,600 emails beats 200, and there's you're not going to get those emails from the council or from your So I'll hand over. I just thought I'd quickly counter, because that's how my Sunday.
If you spend the rest of your Sunday doing those, that's fantastic. That's never been my experience, and
wow.
God bless you. I mean,
poor me.
I hope you get elected. It's because it's like that which is missing. It's because that so often that just never happens. It's a con. I don't mean particularly by the Lib Dems or anybody else, but it's not what and it undermines the whole system. So good for you.
Well, thank you. Over to David.
Okay, yeah. So just there's so much I could talk about, but obviously some of us have got 300 bits of casework to deal with today, so I'll try and keep it short. One thing that jumped out to me, because it was so different from our experience on a district council level here in the book, was your ambition to go for trying to essentially get control of the council in one fell swoop from a standing start, which is sort of the opposite of the way we've had to work in terms of getting a council seat here. Having tried kind of trying to fight a battle on multiple fronts and getting nowhere for a number of years, we chose to be much more focused, and that's paid dividends for us in as much as we actually got a breakthrough win. But obviously, as you rightly point out, there's definitely a limit to what you can achieve with just one lone voice. So is that one of the things that you think maybe would only work up to that sort of level and might not work at a principal authority level, or do you think is there something in the independent banner that makes it more possible to kind of get control of a council in one jump like that?
Yes, I think there is. I think there's such a degree of cynicism and disillusionment with the party system that it is often possible to take over completely. And that's happened in about 8 or 9 places, where enough independents have stood and then they've taken over completely. And the real reason to do it, again, at a town and parish level is that, and I don't know enough about the district and higher levels, but the rules, they're not rules, are they? What they called the book of standing orders. The vast majority of the standing orders turn out to be advice, or this is how we recommend you operate. Of course, there are some like having an audit and things which you have to do, but it turns out that sort of the vast majority aren't. So it means that at a town and parish level, which is honestly, I know some of you stand at that level, but some of the way that agendas are written, some of all that, it's just bollocks. It's just not part of the 21st century. No. And because you can wipe all that out and do things differently in a way that's really engaging, I think the opportunities are so great. Therefore, the prize of having a majority is so big. And without that majority, and without being able to change the rules, it's quite difficult to really make enough radical changes to get a council that really does stuff. And there are lots of places, Monmouth springs to mind particularly, where they technically had a majority. Well, they did have a majority after a load of independents stood. They won 7 out of 15 seats. Is that half? No. Okay, so they won 8 out of 15 seats. But then the person they elected as mayor discovered her ego and left immediately. So then they didn't have a majority, and then the whole thing kind of collapsed. And they've never been able to change the system. And because the clerk is really strong, they're still embedded in 1604, and so they've never been able to do much. Whereas that group of people were really up for radical change. And at these lower levels, it's back to that thing of you're not going to kill anyone. I mean, at the levels you're standing and wanting to, with bigger budgets and decisions that are around education, around health, around bigger issues, that's again is where I think the model is much more suited to a town level, where the decisions you're making can be really influential, can really make things move, but as I say, you're not going to kill anyone. So it's a different game.
I thought we had from Lyndon Graham, we got a question about PR. Is PR the silver bullet, the panacea to all our problems? Maybe it'll be it would certainly help most people around this table. But then once the Labour and the Tories learnt to fight an election on new rules, would we find ourselves squeezed again? I don't know. It's
I think it'd definitely help. I mean,
Yep.
Versions of it. I mean, a lot of our thinking came, as you'll know, from the Alternative Party in Denmark, who at one point had 12 MPs and a set of, who they ran on a set of values and then a crowdsourced manifesto. I mean, they're a sort of national version of what we did in Froome, and they could obviously only do that with PR. And I mean, it means, of course, you have to put up with the 3 or 4 nutters in the corner or the far right this and that. But I've always felt they're better in the room. So yeah, I mean, our system now is insane, isn't it? Where you have this tiny percentage of people who actually voted Tory. I mean, that's a proportion, and then even fewer who voted for Boris, who appears to be the president. So yeah, it's got to be better. But turkeys won't vote for Christmas. This is part of our massive problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, I think I will. If we don't have any more questions, I might slowly start sort of wrapping up. Just say thank you very much. I've enjoyed it. I think I've seen everyone else in the room smile as well. So thank you very much from all of us. Would it be possible to ask for a brief overview of 2.0, which I don't think anyone here has read? Might be something that starts featuring on Christmas lists, because that is the sad bunch of buggers that we are. So
yeah, that's really nerdy if it's on Christmas list.
Maybe not then. What might we have to look forward to?
So it's the learning of the first 6 years, really, as I say, and from a bunch of other councils. I wrote it particularly to try and inspire people who might want to stand at a town and at a town and parish level, at these lower levels, if you like, because Froome has really done a lot. So and then other places as well. So the amount of money we brought in, the amount of projects. So a big chunk of it is, this is what you can do. Because what I hear a lot is, but you've got no power at a town level. What's the point of standing? It just be all these boring meetings. You can't do anything, can you? And so it's written partly as a plea to people. It's kind of saying, actually, you can. I mean, look at this lot. These are the things which you can do with an ambitious, well-motivated town council. And then it's the learning. There's a whole chunk of other ways of working. I mean, of what other people have done to adjust them and evolve them and so on. So it just takes it a stage further. It kind of felt like it finished the story for me, because I didn't stand again. I always said I'd only ever do 2 terms, because there's too many people who just get older and if the people wanted me back the second time, that's fine. And none of the people who stood the first time stood are in the new regime. So it's just an update, really. We might wrap it up into one book at one point, because it just runs through.
Oh, brilliant. Well, yeah. Well, I'd say thank you once again. I've benefited a lot. Thank you from all of us. I might hang around if there's anyone who wants a sort of final word. Yeah, no, I will let you get on with your day, and wishing you a speedy recovery on the back, and
Thank you.
yes, have a nice Sunday. Then goodbye to everyone who if anyone's hanging around, I'll stay for a word.
Yeah, thanks from me as well, Peter, and thanks, Matt, for organising as ever.
It was really enjoyable. I might quickly ask: has anyone? If we're all hanging around, has David? But I think you said you initially. I wanted to ask you really. You said you were initially thinking of not standing as a Green or against the whole.
Oh no, I didn't mean that I'd ever considered standing as a candidate outside of party politics. It was just that I remember as a teenager who was interested in politics, I could never. There were parties that I kind of liked bits of what they said, but never all of what they said.
Yeah.
So I felt like by joining a party, this is like naive 15-year-old me, would be selling out on the bits that I didn't agree with, you know? And so it wasn't until, although I've been interested in politics all that time, it wasn't until 7 or 8 years ago that I actually ever considered joining a political party, much less standing as a candidate or anything like that. And even then, although I'm in the Greens, and I think this view has developed a bit over the last few years, but I know that when I first joined the Greens, a lot of people still thought that was the same organisation as Greenpeace, and it was all about hugging trees and saving the whales and all that. And I like trees and all that, but actually that wasn't my primary motivation for actually getting actively involved in the local Green Party here. It was much more a question of the kind of democratic deficit at a local level that motivated me. Although, as I say, yes, there are certainly green things that we're trying to achieve here as well. But for me, it was really seeing that the system was broken here, and there was no one saying the things I felt needed to be said and asking the questions I felt needed to be asked. And just because of the way the Greens work, and this isn't an advert or a party political broadcast or anything, but as I think Peter probably is aware from a couple of the comments he's made, the way that the Greens are structured, it's much more kind of a bottom up rather than a top down hierarchical thing. And so each local party has a lot of autonomy in terms of what they choose to focus on and the stance they take on various issues. So that all seemed to me like I wouldn't be compromising the 15-year-old David Francis's ideals by joining up and standing as a Green candidate.
Okay. Yeah, and
I'm off. Thanks.
I'm gonna have to make a move as well, but
yes,
yeah,
I think I will too. Mainly stomach grumbling and
casework.
President to answer. Lucky me. Anyway, we have a lovely Sunday all, and see you soon. See you
later.
later.
See you later.
Yeah.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Bye.